So I'm Dale Caldwell. I'm the president of Centenary University. I started in July, but I'm a little different president. My background's in business and others, but I'm also pastor of Covenant United Methodist Church in Plainfield, New Jersey. And so I'm finding I'm one of the few people that's an active pastor and an active president of the university. And both have real opportunities that society hasn't really utilized. And my good friend Janet Werner in the back really introduced me to this idea of a spiritual experience. And she'll share in a little bit some of her perspective. And so the reason we're doing this is that mental health, obviously working with young people and others, I think is the biggest challenge in the world. How I got into it, I was actually the head of school at a village charter school in Trenton, New Jersey. It was 95% African American, 95% free and reduced lunch, and many of the students had PTSD. But I said, well, it's not post-traumatic stress disorder, so I coined a term called urban traumatic stress disorder, UTSD, and people have been using them. And the idea is, as you know, the amygdala is hijacked. And there's nothing to do with how smart these students are, but it's as if there's a tiger in the room. As we, if there was a tiger in the room, we wouldn't be having this calm conversation. So you know this, you live this. But what gets me is that the historic mental health approach has left out critical things, like this urban trauma, like spirituality. And so what we're trying to do is really bring together this coalition, NJAMHAA, initially housed at Centenary University. When I heard this and we were talking about this, I said, we've got to do this for a number of reasons. One of which is that we are actually the first university in the world to have a master's in happiness studies. And our professor teaching it, Tal Ben Shahir, was the most popular professor at Harvard University. And Harvard wouldn't give a master's for this, so we give a master's. And the idea about happiness is seeking happiness is not the way to be happy. No. It's really about anti-resilience, right? It's about how you deal with the inevitable downsides. And so there's all sorts of research around that. So then when we talked about this, and Calvin, you really explained the spiritual experience so well. I mean, you really, this is so ingrained. And I think what we need to do is really get more of this out to the world. And so New Jersey is, and that's what this coalition is all about, is bringing together you, doesn't matter what you believe, what your experiences are, or so on, but to really address every aspect of this mental health crisis. And one of the things I often say when I do a lot of talking in urban schools, I'm not still on the New Brunswick Board of Education, is I say, well, mental health, I was a young black man growing up in Harlem, and mental health is like, I'm not crazy. So I'm not, and so what we often say are broken emotions. And I've said that if you break your leg, you're not going to run the 100-meter dash. But if you have broken emotions, you're supposed to be normal. So that seems to have resonated with young people. I broke up with my girlfriend. I got broken emotions. So I think what we have to do as NJ Aware is to begin to make the language more relevant to society. And so we're hoping that you will be, and Janet, do we have sign-ups here? Do we, we're going to connect with people to really get them to she has all sorts of stuff on the back. But it's the idea of really talking about this. And we want to open up a dialogue, and that's really what I want to do is really open it up to you and hear some questions, for what you heard or this concept. First of all, how many of you have worked with, he asked how many of you have had a spiritual experience. How many of you have worked with somebody who's had a spiritual experience?
Oh, that's interesting.
Interesting. How were you able to handle it? We're all family here, so did you call if it was someone in traditional religion, a minister or someone to help? How have you handled it? Janet,
a quick example.
You want to come up?
My minister called me when an elder had a spiritual experience because the minister was not familiar with it. And because I had a relationship with the person, we handled it by just sitting down, establishing trust, talking slow, and giving her choice of what did she need to move forward. So that connects to some of the work that we're doing with the coalition, and that's to train ministers. Because a lot of times you can talk about it as a pastor, you might know what a spiritual experience is like in the church, but if it happens on the corner, not so short.
Not so short, yeah.
I want to share a story of, it's not through my job, but I went out with my church to do missions. It was going out in the streets of Camden and approaching people with addiction and things like that, offering prayer and resources like food and things like that. But you can see how addiction is really, really tied to spirituality, because the ways, usually someone won't, if you ask a person that's, having, I'm sorry if I'm using the wrong word, a trip, or, they're not going to say yes to prayer. They're going to go about, especially because, like, a second before we approached him, he had a needle, ready, and I think he just finished doing what he was doing. And the way he looked at us and said yes to prayer, you can tell that he was stuck. Like there was like a spiritual battle against his flesh, and it was just like he was stuck. So I can really see the spirituality and mental health. And it breaks my heart to see people out there, because before I did that mission trip, we found it funny when we saw someone like leaning over in the streets of like, he's about to fall or something. And when you saw it, it became so real, and it was just so like sad. It really breaks your heart. You have that compassion that comes in. It's just like I want to see that person be free.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
And part of this is that dialogue. I mean, I just, I have not trained in this, and for me to come up with nobody's pushed back on UTSD, urban traumatic stress disorder. So it really tells me that it's time for a dialogue to say what's going on out there, and social media and other things, so that we can really begin to address this as a community. And those of us that have worked in urban communities or even rural communities, we know there are things that, one of the challenges with having been on a number of school boards is that the public sector is designed to meet the middle of the road, right? All programs are designed to meet what's the average person dealing with the mental health crisis. What this NJAMHAA is all about is let's try to address all aspects of it. And let's bring together the dialogue of things that, no judgment, that are aberrant, and let's share our stories like that story and other stories. And I think this is such a crisis. And, I think if we address this crisis, more people would look at climate change, right? Right? More people would be in a position to think about climate change, this and poverty. So other comments, thoughts, yeah.
So my work in cultural competency and cultural humility, I work under the Department of Mental Health doing cultural competency plans for agencies throughout the state of New Jersey. One of the things I'm finding is that organizations have not adapted new policies from 1,000 years ago. Books, everything. So as we have a diverse spiritual organization, they're not taking into account bereavement practices.
Yeah.
They're not taking account into anything that someone might need from a prayer perspective. They're not giving room for that. They're not allowing that to happen, and they're still going back to these antiquated ways of rats in a maze in a cube, and where they think productivity is going to work best.
Right.
And we're finding that this is just such a horrible environment to work in, that overarching everything else, because policies haven't changed, we're adding so much fuel to the fire on this. And you can't just have someone who is going through bereavement and go, I'm on Facebook, let me say sorry for your loss.
Right.
This is not appropriate for so many different places that we need to be able to be respectful of that. I'd love to see policy change. I'd love to see people put this in employee handbooks. I'd love to see things change and move forward with this. But I can't believe how many people see something different from them and call the police. We had a neighbor call police on my next door neighbor because they had too many people worshiping at their house. It's none of your business. So it's those types of things that for me are, I see this on a weekly basis, but I'd like to see something change differently in that mentality and from the leadership piece within the organizations to let people have the freedom to embrace their spirituality instead of squelch it.
That's exactly, and that's what this is. So I used to be Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Community Affairs in the McGreevey administration. So I have a sense of what it's like to be a senior official in government. And those that are good want this kind of, because the higher you go, the less you know about what's going on in the real world. It's really kind of a real interesting thing. Even when you're coming from the community, when you're community, you forget a lot of stuff because you're so focused on a lot of nonsense. But I think that's what this is about, is to begin to bring the dialogue. And we have enough, as a college president, we have enough influence to begin to change the narrative. We can write articles about some of the things and others. And I think people are willing to hear this But, you know, legislators have no clue. Government officials don't have a clue. It's up to both of us that are in the grassroots to really begin to speak up.
Could I ask you, what would you, since you're working in that area with the, what would your thoughts be about just beginning to implement this language and this understanding of self-worth and dignity? Because moving people just there automatically sets up a foundation for connecting with that spiritual core, but we don't use this language. What do you think?
So many people are defined by terms. We see women that say, oh, it's imposter syndrome. I hate
Right.
that term. We need to get rid of those types of things and create that foundation and have positive adapting coping skills to deal with the basics of things. We're not in a position, we're using all maladaptive ways of coping with the smallest of things. I shouldn't say, oh, my Frappuccino wasn't cold enough, so I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna, you know, hit somebody or I'm gonna do something else. Like, those are the very basic being. So I love to find a way to use that spirituality to help people strengthen their core. Just like if you were working out every day and you have to strengthen the core of your body to sustain itself. It just came from the dementia conversation.
Yeah.
How do you think you get that way? You have to strengthen your core. This is your core.
Well, what it looks like as we learn more and do more neuroscience and brain imaging, it looks like we may, all of you are familiar with the capacity for abstract thought and reasoning that comes during adolescence. It looks like we might have a portion of a capacity for, that's reason, for compassion. And we don't promote it. A capacity for courage. In fact, some of the animals show, this is interesting, that courage is controlled by a hormone, and it happens like that, which is what the faith awakening experience. It's when courage just jumps out. So we've got it wired in, but we're not promoting it. All we promote is reason. We don't promote compassion. What?
Ethics and courage are tied.
Yeah, reason, the moral core, are compassion and love and courage are all part of the soul experience. And whether you like the word soul, you can use spirit. The core of humanity. It's what drives us all. Thank you for your comments.
So I'm thinking about like the keynote speakers from yesterday morning, and they talk about depths of despair. And so, you know, I think a lot of what you guys are talking about correlates very directly with these deaths of despair. Why are the depression rates and the overdose rates and the suicide rates so high? Well, the reason is because we've lost, and I talked
faith.
to Caldwell, we've lost kind of this importance or this emphasis on faith. I mean, people will talk about blue zones. You guys know everybody knows what blue zones are, right? These are places in the world where, you know, people live long, and they're trying to figure out, what's the secret? It's not like rocket science. I mean, one of the core elements of them living long is they have this sense of spirituality. It doesn't matter if you're Hindu, it doesn't matter if you're Christian, but they have this sense of faith and this core spirituality, so they're able to be more resilient and deal with adversity. And I don't think in like the, you know, kind of the current way people think and what people currently emphasize, they don't prioritize the spirituality.
Part of the faith experience is this idea that I can handle it. Life is going to throw me some curveballs, but I, with going to my source and with others, will be able to withstand this. And maybe there's a meaning in my life for that to happen and for me to be here today.
And this too shall pass.
Right.
There's a beginning and end.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
Because change is the only constant. There's always going to be a beginning and end, even to adversity. So.
Great. Other comments? Yes.
There's two different things that came to mind while the gentlemen were speaking. One, a couple of years ago, there was somebody that they wanted to send over to our facility. They were the facility that they were in was letting them go, and they were labeling him as schizophrenic and OCD. And so there was something about in reading his case that I said, no, I'm gonna let him come in. And so I looked into what were the reasons that he was being labeled schizophrenic. Well, he was an Orthodox Jew, and when he was coming out of the men's room, he was saying his prayers. There were certain prayers that they say if they go to the restrooms, and the therapist was trying to talk to him, and he wouldn't connect with the therapist. He kept on saying his prayers. So they said that he's hearing things and talking.
Talking to himself.
The other thing was that before he ate, he did the ritual of washing his hands in a certain specific way. And when he put on his shoes, he put his shoes on in a specific way that goes along with his faith. That was his OCD. And so
Oh,
it really
jeez.
spoke to me about how they've made us, for LCADCs and various licenses, that we have to go to cultural courses and everything.
Cultural-
But we are not applying those principles to when we actually see people living, okay? And the word dignity really came out in being able to respect the differences. So several years before that, because I have a passion for this in my own amateur way, one of the things I got our organization to do was invite, within a certain radius, men of faith from all different religions, mosques and temples, and we invited them all. I was so excited about this. We had the refreshments out, we had all of these things. We had 2 people show up, two ministers showed up. And to me, it just showed why we need to put more effort into that.
Right.
Of course, the organization said this is a failure, it's not gonna work, and they stopped.
Mhm.
And to me, that needed to be the beginning, not the end
Right.
of what we needed to do. So I think we see this, and it is the labeling of people and what they're supposed to be. And working with at that time, at a very religious Jewish population, that were coming into the facility, they were afraid of the other people because they were taught to be afraid of them. And other people looked at them as being different.
Right.
And one of the great uniters that can happen in the facility is you get in a circle and you are there with your humanity. And you watch people start to make eye contact with one another and to be able to accept each other for human beings and not the label that they came in with. Good enough that they have the label of addict and drug addict. I don't want them to have other labels that they want too. Because how can they get to their dignity if everything that we are saying to them is that you're not worth that?
Or you're broken.
Or you're broken.
Right.
Oh, and the lights go out.
But that's you talk about sports, you talk about the military where people are coming together. One of the things, so my dad knew in March with Dr. Martin Luther King, and actually he passed away in 2020. I have a picture of my dad, Ralph Abernathy, and Dr. King, arm in arm, and so I grew up there. But I learned something about privilege as president of the university. So I have a president's house, and when I got there, it has an elevator. I have 4 floors and an elevator. This is the greatest. I have an elevator in my house. This is 8 months ago, and I assume everybody has an elevator in their house. And so that's the thing about privilege, and that's why people don't get it, because it's out of it. So we have to, those of us that get it, have to understand why people don't get something very basic. Because we're sitting there, it's obvious, we got to do more. So we have to form this coalition so we can bring people together to do this. And so in our last 8 minutes, I know one of the things we're doing, and Janet's spearheading, is a documentary. And to really do the first of its kind around this spiritual experience. So, Janet, do you want to say something about
Yeah, come on up.
Come on up.
Okay. So thank you. It's wonderful to have.
Is it pointed towards you? Is it
Go.
pointed?
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
right there.
I'll hang
Yeah,
between the,
yeah.
no, I like being in between both of you. So, yes, we have 3 things that we would like you to just take away with and walk out the door with. 1, the New Jersey Coalition that connects religious, spiritual leaders, and mental health leaders and lived experience. We meet virtually, but we would like to host an actual live one
Yeah,
at
absolutely.
Centenary. So once a month, just pick up some materials or talk to me, we'll get you on that. And it's just growing in the conversation. Number 2 is you all found a postcard, and those postcards were created a week after I was released from a psychiatric hospital in 2005. I had a spiritual experience, and they would not believe me, even though I brought the DSM book in with me and pointed to the V code that so many of you probably know. So anyway, I survived, got out, and then I said, God, what am I going to do here in this isolation? Meaning my family, and I'm feeling it. Anyway, short. I was told literally postcards from home. because I could send a card from my heart to you, from my home to you, when I felt so isolated. So we now have these cards. There are many more outside, and Dr. Caldwell sponsored them a few years ago to spread thousands and thousands around the state of New Jersey. So they're available. The last one, I'm going to ask you to just give me a breather, docuseries. Dr. Calvin
Slow down.
is...
Take some deep breaths.
Let's give her a round of
I didn't know I was going to tell you my personal story, but that's why I'm doing a docuseries. I've waited 19 years. I knew that we were going to do this, but I didn't know how long it would take. So I'm going to ask you to do this in tandem. Dr. Chatlis and I met a few years ago, and he pronounced me as what? Not bipolar.
Not bipolar.
I am officially not bipolar.
But it was an example where that label just was so damaging to her self-worth and dignity that she couldn't get over it, because the whole culture has adopted it.
So Dr. Chatlos is an investor in the docuseries. We are still looking for more investors, but we're also welcoming professionals and lived experiencers into it. So we film throughout the summer. Please talk to me about that. And we do film up at the Centenary University. So we're really filming all around New Jersey, but we're including stories from around the globe and all religions.
And part of our message, one part of our message is the mental health system needs to pay attention to this and do some changing. The second one is the whole public needs to be aware that spiritual experiences are real, are powerful, and can have a transformational effect on our lives, and we should value them. We should promote them, and that doesn't mean we have to be with any specific religious tradition, but it can be. We finally all come together.
I haven't worked in a NJAMHAA accredited facility for a long time, but I seem to remember the last time I did back in the late 80s that they had added spirituality to some, but I don't think it really went anywhere, did it?
It's present. We all have to ask it on our intake forms at least, and it's usually 2 sentences, and that's it. Yeah. Part of the problem is people don't quite know what to do with it. Yeah. What do you do when you ask? I start with, were you raised in any religious tradition? If yes, to what degree was it important? Okay, and I'll follow. Did you get confirmed if you were a Christian, or did you get bar mitzvah if you were Jewish or whatever? And what about as an adult? Are you connected with any religious tradition? Yes, no? One more question. Do you consider yourself to be spiritual? When someone that has that connection, they light up, because no one will ask them that. And they will feel a connection, and we can now get into seeing what's important, because that is what's important.
I guess 2 things. One, it should be in every treatment plan. There should be an aspect of it, whether the person is to explore it, to ask what you like about it, what you don't like about it, whatever that is. So it should be in treatment plans. The other thing about the power of a postcard, many years ago, because I'm old. Older. Experience. They didn't talk about trauma in the addiction field. It was that you had to be clean 5 years in order to...
5 years, right.
Right, but of course nobody was getting clean 5 years because they didn't work on the trauma. So what was the timeline that should be in that? Well, somebody came to me and they said, would you be willing to work with us and go into Europe, Switzerland specifically, and we want to have an international conference on addictions and trauma. Okay, so this is what we did. The lady came in with these address lists of people in all different countries that were social workers and psychologists and everything. And me and my kids and her kids, we wrote postcards just by going on the address and said, we're going to be meeting in Zurich on this date. We'd like you to come. People from 27 countries showed up.
Oh my God.
People from 27, and it was dreaming the dream and following through on it. And it was, and after that, every year, there started to be a international conference on incest and related disorders and all of those things, words that were unspeakable. And one of the reasons that we started in Switzerland was they didn't even have in their language the word incest. You would have to say what the definition of it was. That's how unspeakable it was.
Wow.
And it was the start of something. And one of the important parts of it also was not that we were all learning about this together, but any therapist, any priestly person or minister, anybody that was working in that field was very isolated because they had nobody to speak
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
And coming together, they all of a sudden had a universal language.
Yeah.
That when they said dignity, they knew what they meant. When they said faith, they knew what they meant. And just that in itself empowered people then to go back to all their countries
Right.
and to spread it. And so, you know, there was a
the point.
commercial
That's it.
for, there was a
That's exactly right.
commercial for a shampoo that, I forget what it was, but you tell one person and you tell one person.
Yeah.
and you
Yes.
tell one person, and they would fill the screen with all these faces. And I think that's part of the majesty of the work that we can do.
Excellent. I know we have to wrap up,
Right.
yeah?
Yep.
So we'll stay here after and give you some notes and definitely welcome support for Postcards, the Coalition, and the docuseries.
And the one, let me let you have the last word, but the one thing we have to realize, especially working with young people, is that with social media, everything's pretty and perfect, right? And so this dialogue has to happen because the world is ugly and not perfect. And I think more than ever before, more than even when I was a young kid, this is really important. So I'm hoping you can sign up for this, you can bring others, because we need this now more than ever, especially here in Jersey.
And I would like to thank, this is the most
Yes.
receptive audience that I think we've presented this with, so we appreciate the feedback. Hope that you will stay tuned in and see as we schedule events, and you're all welcome to pick up a flyer. Come to that training, and we'll explore this in deeper.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good job, sir. Great stuff.
Yeah.